this is from my recollection. This may not be right, but I recall mainline running from about 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. every night. And once again, I was in the tail end of mainline. Not the very, very end, but tail end. And I would approximate that my programs ran about midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. I know that because if they failed, I'd get a call waking me up. Those were great. At 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, asking me a complicated question like, you know, you got this message on your sysout, what do you want to do? Or worse, I got an OC7 or an OC4, which, you know, that's something you can't debug over the phone. Of course, in those days, we didn't have terminals, so I couldn't just say, okay, don't worry about it, I'll just pull it up and go look at it. I had to go into the office. I mean, that was the only way to solve it, and look over the sysout. Okay, look through a dump. So, you know, that wasn't fun. But luckily, like I said, I didn't have many problems because it was at the tail end. So I can only recall really going in maybe a couple times, which was not bad at all, you know, but going in at that time, it was terrible. The other thing I remember is once I got a call and gave an answer to the problem, I couldn't go back to sleep because I kept thinking, did I give the right answer? You know, I didn't want to give the wrong answer. I mean, nobody does. But, you know, I kept thinking, oh boy, you know, was that right? And of course, at that time of night or early morning, I'm not thinking straight. So that was kind of the problem about having a late batch program. Okay, also at that time there were two CRCs, or Circuit Record Centers, I believe it stands for, basically computer rooms. At the time I started with the company, I believe the northern one was in San Francisco. It was in the basement of 180 New Montgomery. I remember that because I would go downstairs and check it out every once in a while when I had a problem. The other one, I think, was in LA. I don't really know that because it at some point migrated to Buena Park, and I do know that because I did go to Buena Park. But I believe in the early time that I was there, it was in LA. I may be wrong with that, but that's my recollection. And eventually, later on, the San Francisco one moved to Concord. So during my prime working years with the facility system, the CRCs were in Buena Park and Concord. And of course, we had to go there for turnover meetings. I remember that. You know, you had to turn over changes to the system to the operations staff to make sure they understood what to do when something happened, and had to satisfy them, and they had to buy off on the fact that you're changing the programs. This would be a major change, not minor changes. Okay, when I first got to the facility system in 1974, they were still on punch cards. When I was going through my training, I was producing my programs on punch cards, which means I had to know how to do some key punching skills. And it also meant that when we did runs, and once again, this may or may not be right, but I seem to remember we would get maybe 2 or 3 runs a day. That's not a lot, obviously. I mean, and what that meant was that we did an extreme amount of desk checking. I mean, you checked everything. The worst thing that could possibly happen to you is to get a JCL error. I mean, that's the worst, because you get absolutely nothing for half a day of run, and then you have to wait again, you know. So anyway, it was a different type of world where everything was really looking at it, scrutinizing it, really checking it thoroughly at your desk, because you wanted to make sure that run was the best you could do. Okay, the code in those days, you know, I respect the early mainliners, but it was spaghetti code. Okay, this was the days, or these were the days before they introduced structured coding. Therefore, there were go-tos, and I kind of remember altered go-tos, which, if I remember right, you could change a go-to and make it go to a different place. That was a lot of fun to try to track down. The code went around in circles. Paragraph names were not meaningful. It just was a different environment. It kind of tested your ability to follow a program. It also made you very afraid to make a change, because you never quite knew what you were doing. I mean, you could look at it as best you could, make a change, think you got it, and it affected something else that you had no idea. You know, that's what happens. Actually, that's always been true. So, but probably more in those days. Okay, one of the main concerns, I think, in the early days was core, or the memory of the mainframe. I kind of looked up, I kind of remember the mainframe being something like a 370-165. Okay, it was an IBM 370-165. I couldn't remember what the core sizes of that, so I looked it up online, and they said online it was somewhere between 512K, that's K, and 3 meg. Okay, this is a mainframe computer. Okay, up to 3 meg. Now you're probably laughing at that because this video probably wouldn't fit in that mainframe. So what that meant is that you had to do some creative coding, and I didn't do this personally, but some of the programs I know were modularized. There was a term for that. I can't remember what it is, but what you did was you swapped out a section of your code for a piece of code you weren't using so that it would fit in the box. Okay, so that's something that I don't think is really that considered anymore. Okay, its memory I think is pretty cheap nowadays. But that was definitely a concern at that time. Okay, let's see. Del Davis and the early mainliners. You probably have seen Del Davis's interview before me because I've tried to chronologically put these in order based on maybe when you entered the facility system. Kind of flows better that way. I can remember as a young man going to luncheons or whatever and listening to these early mainliners tell stories. It just absolutely cracked me up. These guys were so funny telling me stories and telling everybody else, of course, and reminiscing about how the early days of mainline. Okay, things like, and I think this is right. Mainline, I think maybe in the original days used to run a week. Okay, and I told you it ran daily. Okay, and that's still probably in today's terms is well, it's probably normal, but it was a long cycle. But in those days, they could barely get it done in a week. Okay, which I don't know how they ever inventoried anything with that kind of turnaround. They'll also mention, I think, in his interview that they worked 70-hour work weeks in the beginning. They were just crammed together and grouped together for long periods of time. And he told me, and other members of the old mainliners too, told me and told us that there were some marriages going on at that time. I mean, people were so close to one another. People got married, and I think they even got divorced. So it was a totally different environment, I guess, at that time where people who almost lived together, so to speak. Not really, but they were together for so many hours that I don't know. They almost became like relatives of one another. Interesting situation. Okay, some of the advances that I remember, and you're probably laughing at these because they aren't really advancements. Excuse me. One of the first things that came in that I can recall was the RJE, Remote Job Entry. Okay, what did that do? It was a machine that let you read the card deck directly to the computer. Wow, big deal. Yeah, it was. Okay, because you didn't have to wait for 2 or 3 a day runs. You could run it and get results, within, I don't know, I can't remember initially how long it took, maybe half an hour, I don't know, to where, it almost come back instantaneously. That was a big change. I think desk checking kind of went out the door. I mean, people just put their decks in, let it fly, and if it got a JCL error, no problem, just rerun it. Okay, so it changed the way we thought about, doing our jobs. Okay, I think, and I don't know the years about this, the next maybe progression in that was getting dumb terminals, and I mean dumb terminals. The terminals just connected to the computer. They weren't PCs, they didn't have word processors, they didn't have all that stuff. They were just connections to the terminals. But you didn't have card decks. You could store the programs on the computer. Wow, now that was really great. And you could submit things and things like that. That was a big, big, big change. Initially, we had dumb terminals in our cubicles, and I'm not talking individual cubicles. We did not have individual cubicles back there at 180 New Montgomery. We had grouped cubicles of maybe 4, 5, 6 people in one cubicle. So you might have one terminal, maybe if you're lucky, 2 terminals in a cubicle. Obviously that means you share terminals. Okay, you did not get a dedicated terminal to yourself. But they were such a great improvement. Who was arguing? I mean, all these were positive things. If you were to look at it now, you'd probably say, you got to be kidding me, share a terminal? But that's the way it was. Okay, some stories and some memories of the facility system. Okay, the first one that comes to mind, as I mentioned, I came out of college going into the phone company. So I was a raw 22-year-old person coming in. If I recall, at 3 months, I had to go to a managerial training class. So I walk in, and of course, you know, the managers in those days were all these plant guys who had 15, 18, 20 years of service. I kind of remember 20 years as kind of like getting your feet wet with the phone company. You got 20 years, you're starting to really, you know, hold some water. In fact, I think the early definition of becoming a telephone pioneer was 20 years. I think that's correct. So that's kind of the milestone for even getting, you know, becoming recognized, so to speak. So anyway, they go around, they do introductions. Okay, I'm so and so, you know, 15 years here, you know, I plan all these different things, you know, 18 years, 20 years, 25 years, whatever. And these guys are just becoming managers because they're going to managerial training. Here comes Rich Soon. Hi, I'm Rich Soon. I have 3 months with the company. And I'm thinking these guys are looking at me saying, where did this guy come from? You know, and I asked some of the guys afterwards, and they didn't have any problem with it. They said, if you can do the work, we have no problem with it. But I kind of wonder underneath if they're thinking, man, this guy had it made. How could this young guy get through, you know, into management? You know, but that's the way it was. You know, programmers were management. So I was immediately a manager, even though I didn't manage anybody. The second thing I remember was EEO compliance. When I got hired, I never even thought that maybe my ethnicity had a factor in how I got hired. There was something going around in the inboxes, I think monthly or whatever, that showed the number of Asians and other, you know, blacks or whatever, you know, Hispanics, all that, I believe, males, females at each level. They had a quota for each one. And I could count out, and among the Asians, you know, me being Asian, who was where. I kind of knew who all these people were within the facility system. And it dawned on me that, gee, you know, maybe I was hired to fill a quota. It was a little bit insulting, actually, personally. I hope that was not true, but I'll never know. You know, I'll never know if that is true. Okay, I mentioned a little bit before about lunches. You know, there were so many of them, I guess, service anniversaries, whatever. I can't even remember what caused a lunch, but we just always seemed to have lunches, you know. And the interesting thing is that the lunches tended to be, you know, fairly long, and we were on company time, okay. In the early days, you know, I guess they felt that you'd make up for it, or whatever. I don't know. But anyway, the other thing that kind of goes along with that is we had some picnics, and I can recall going to a picnic on Treasure Island on company time. Obviously, it was like a half-day deal, I think. I think we went into work in the morning. We took a ferry over to oh, I'm sorry, I said Treasure Island. I knew that was wrong. It's Angel Island. Angel Island. We took a ferry over to Angel Island, and that was the rest of the day. It was a different time that you could do that kind of stuff. Somebody mentioned, I think, the softball team. Yes, you know, that was fun. You know, we were able to associate and have fun that way. Another thing I remember would be the Christmas parties at Sears Fine Foods, which was a downtown tradition. And we used to do that for Christmas breakfast, and it was an all-you-can-eat buffet. And I remember after eating that, I'd never have lunch. It just said, they gave you so much food and they kept bringing it. If you asked, they would bring you more. So it was a never-ending buffet, so to speak. Even though it was a buffet, they served you. Okay, I'm going to mention 3 people here, and I apologize to anybody else because I've made so many friends or whatever. These 3 people, they're kind of interesting stories. That's why I'm mentioning them. Okay, the first one is Kelvin Say. I don't know how many people knew him. He wasn't with the phone company very long, actually. But he was there in the early years when I was there. He spells his name, he's Japanese, and he spells his last name S-E-I. I spell my last name S-U-E-N. Pretty close. We're both Asian. We both were about the same build. He was slightly taller than I was, but, you know, we could have been confused, and that was the issue. We were constantly being confused. People would walk up to me and say, hey, Kelvin, how you doing? You know? And I look at him and say, I'm Rich. Oh, yeah, I know who you are. And people would constantly do that. Well, there's 2 other additional stories to that. One time I was talking to the Buena Park CRC. I remember on the phone. And in the middle of the conversation, they said, yeah, Kelvin, you know, it sounds good or something. And I heard it. I said, no. because the person I was talking to, I'd never met them. Okay, I'd never met them in person, had never seen me. And then a little later on, they brought it up again. They said, yeah, Kelvin, that sounds good, or whatever, yeah, we'll do that. And I said, you know, this is Rich Soon on this side. And they said, oh, yeah, I'm sorry, you know. They got me confused on the phone without even meeting me. You know, and they never met Kelvin. I asked them, that's right, I asked them, did you ever meet Kelvin Say? And they said, no, we never met him either. That to me is kind of strange, you know. The other story was Paul Knoll. Paul Knoll was I'll say infamous trainer. He was the guy I went through training with, and a lot of people went through training with. He was really, really tough. He made life hell for you, okay? Anytime he could kind of rub it in, he would do it. You know, I don't know if Paul's still around, but he may have a good chuckle at that. He made it tough. You know, he was very rigorous. Anyway, one day I was walking through the hall, and he walks up to me. He says, you know, and he shows me this, I think it was a training sheet or something, like flowchart or something. And he says, this is not right, you know. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm not in training. You know, I was long out of training. And I looked down at the bottom of the sheet and said, Kelvin Say. So he's going on, and he's not letting me get a word in. He's just talking, you know, oh yeah, well, you know, this is not right. I don't think you should do it this way and all this. And then at the very, very end, when he took a break, I said, you know, Paul, this is not me, this is Kelvin Say. And he just went quiet and he walked away. So anyway, you know, it was a very interesting thing with Kelvin. I'm still in touch with Kelvin, actually. We send Christmas cards. I haven't seen him in years, but, you know, we're still in touch. I know where he is. The second one was Rod Hauser, okay? Rod Hauser was one of the first people I met when I went to the online, crossed over to the online district, probably like 3 years of service. I was a young guy still, okay? I didn't have good tact, okay? I'll be honest with that. You know, when you're young, you just don't have, you know, the social graces. Anyway, Rod was talking to a bunch of guys. They said, yeah, you know, I started in 1952 with a phone company and all this. And I looked at him and I said, you know, Rod, I was born in 1952. And he went quiet and he looked at me and said, shut up. You know, he didn't like that. And I don't blame him. You know, I don't blame him at all. Once again, being young, you know, you just don't have tact. But interestingly enough, at the end of my career, toward the end there, you know, there was a lady that, she didn't do that to me in the same way, but we were talking, and she said she was born in 1974. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, I started with the company in 1974. So, you know, turnaround is fair play. I guess, you know, what goes around comes around, you know. So anyway, I know what it felt like then. Okay, the last story I have of an individual is Ron Ferre. I worked for Ron Ferre when I went to the online district, and there was another, I'll call him character, around the floor, Ralph Morwitz. Ralph Morwitz came up to me one day and said, you know, it's Ron Ferre's birthday. We ought to call him, I should back up, I'm sorry I didn't tell the story right. Ron Ferre was no longer my boss. He had moved back close to home in Marin County somewhere. He lived in Marin County, and he moved up there to Marin County to be closer to home. So that's where he was working at that time. Anyway, Ralph Morwitz says, you know, it's Ron's birthday. Let's call him up and ask him and sing happy birthday to him. I said, Ralph, go away. You know, I got stuff to do here, you know. But he said, come on, Rich, you know him, you work for him, whatever, you know, you can make up an excuse. We want to have a meeting with him, you know, just get him on a conference call and we'll do that. So I said, okay, I'll do that. So I call Ron up, and I was pretty good at keeping a straight face, you know. I made up something saying, you know, Ron, I need to talk to you about this old thing that we used to work on or something, you know, are you available for a conference call? He said, really? You know, and all this. And so he said, okay, you know, I'll do that. So, you know, they came, and I think it was like midday or something, and I know it was around Christmas time, and I'll tell you why in a second. Right before that, you know, I'm thinking, okay, I got to get ready to make this conference call, gather the people. I look up, Ron Ferre is coming in the office. I almost fainted. You know, I'm thinking he came in for a meeting. He didn't hear the fact that I said a conference call. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what did I do, you know? And of course, I'm the one that's guilty, not Ralph, because I'm the guy that set it up, you know? So yeah, I'm looking like I got egg on my face. Ron was a great guy, you know, and hopefully Ron is still with us, but he just said, that's okay. He laughed at it, you know. We wished him a happy birthday. He said, okay, that's all right. I'm here in San Francisco. I can go shopping. That's why I remember it was Christmas. It was around Christmas time. You could do some shopping for Christmas time. Thank goodness it wasn't somebody who would just come down on me and just say, what were you thinking, you know? Because it could have ended up really badly. Okay, so those are my 3 stories. You can tell why I told them because they're just totally unusual.